ladies and gentlemen, I'm thrilled to be able to have as our guest, featured fireside chat guest, a gentleman by the name of Mike Thomas. Mike is the director of the INOVA Personalized Healthcare Accelerator, which is part of the broader INOVA healthcare system, which we'll talk about. And I will not try to even begin to scratch the surface of Mike's accomplishments. He is an international serial entrepreneur, venture capitalist, CEO, board chairman, and his focus is health tech, life tech, biotech, etc. And I am just absolutely thrilled to be able to say, please welcome Mike Thomas. Huh?
Right here?
Yeah, that's fine. We don't have to sit so far across.
The fire doesn't come on.
Won't come on?
It was gonna be cool.
I was gonna be real cute tonight, guys, and that is that I found a 2-hour looping burning fireside that I wanted to put up here during our event, and unfortunately, due to technical problems, we were not able to make that happen. So you'll get to see it next month. Anyway, Mike, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thrilled that you're here.
Thank you.
Let's
Working now? Yeah.
let's set the groundwork. You're from this area originally, am I correct?
Yeah, born and raised in Gambles, Maryland. And went to Arundel High School, and my wife and I, my wife went to a neighboring high school. We met at Beach Week in Ocean City, and our kids are born and raised here, and yeah, so it's total Maryland, all the way around the county.
Now, are you still in Anne Arundel County, or have you
Yeah.
migrated over toward the INOVA campus?
No, we live in Serena Park, where we've lived for over 23 years, and my parents still live in the same house in Gambles, where we grew up, yeah. So,
And how many kids do you have?
Three,
Three?
yeah, so I have a son who just graduated from Cornell University. He's actually in Boston today interviewing for a healthcare company. My daughter who's in the audience, she's an honors bio major at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. And then my youngest son just graduated high school, and he's going to be a freshman at the University of San Diego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any of them lacrosse players in the past?
Actually, all of them were.
Oh, okay.
All of them were lacrosse players, soccer, lacrosse, there was field hockey, lacrosse. And then my daughter and my oldest son switched to rowing, because we sponsored a Navy midshipman who was a varsity rower, and he convinced them to try out, and they did the Navy rowing camp. And then, so my oldest son was captain of the Cornell rowing team, and they were national champions last year. And not so national champions this year, but you know, they ended up 7th in the country, which wasn't bad. And my daughter was field hockey and rowing, and then went back to field hockey though in college. So she gave up the rowing part, because I think St. Andrews is a little cold for rowing.
Got it.
Yeah. And my youngest was a lacrosse soccer player.
Typical high school career? Anything within your high school career that stood out that was of significance, that may have had a significant impact in your later career evolution?
Played sports, studied all the time. I came from it was a big baseball high school, so I ended up playing baseball in college. So that's probably about it.
Okay. And then you went on to Cornell, and you majored in microbiology, am I correct?
I did, yep.
Okay, and found out tonight that Mike just happens to be from the same fraternity as my father and his twin were from, which is Phi Kappa Psi. Different colleges, but same fraternity.
Right, yeah.
When did you first get the bug, the entrepreneurship bug? I know that for a while you were with a pharma company doing, I think, sales and marketing related work. Did you have any interest in entrepreneurship during your
Yeah.
college years?
Yeah, so it actually started off, I mean, I did all the normal kid things like mow lawns and babysit, and so that was always good because you get immediate cash. And then when I was in college, because I played baseball this season and the way it worked, I was always late to getting home to get a summer job. So one of my brothers, who's a twin, he went to Washington College, he was a soccer player, and he got home early and he said, yeah, I found this company it's a maid service company, and they need window washers. And he said, I think we could really do well here. And so so I thought, okay, I got nothing else to do, so I got to figure some kind of job. So we ended up getting that job, and we figured that we could we did it, and did pretty well, but then figured we could do it on our own. And so my brother and then my girlfriend at the time, which is my wife, 26 years, we started our own window washing business in the summertime, and we just killed it. We just washed the windows of the big homes in the Annapolis area, and the hardest part for us was that I had to, after getting a degree in microbiology, my dad sat me down and said, I just can't see you being a window washer your whole life. Please tell me you're going to use this degree for something, something else. And so I ended up taking a pay cut by getting a job with Merck as a pharmaceutical salesman. It was really hard for me to do because I thought we were doing really, really well. And we were at the point now where we could start to hire employees, and quality assurance was a bit of an issue. So we had to figure that out, but at the end we decided to get real jobs and we took pay cuts. So I worked for Merck after that.
Okay, so you just mentioned one of the big problems that I know a lot of companies have, particularly when they're young, and that is quality customer service and quality control. So how did you guys solve that problem?
So we didn't. So in window washing, what happened was that we took the approach that we were going to be very clean-cut college kids, very respectful, and we were just going to do a great job at every place that we did because we were doing high-end homes. And what we found was that after we got done, they said, well, what else can you do? And we said, well, what else do you need? They said, well, can you weed? Sure. So we just literally, a house would have so much work for us to do. We'd end up, and at the time, minimum wage I think was like $3.50 an hour, and we were pricing ourselves out at $20 an hour. So for a college kid making $20 an hour, this was an incredible, but it was for services no one was willing to do. And it was hard work, it was labor, but we got lots of poison ivy those summers. But that's how we did it. And then when we figured that we had so much business that we didn't know what to do with, we started hiring some of our friends. And then we started getting challenged on the quality part. This is my brother and my wife, my girlfriend at the time. We said, this is going to be a challenge to scale. How do you really grow it? And we were worried that we couldn't because people would hire us, and word of mouth was how we had our business. Unfortunately, we ended up shutting it down. So not a good story.
What's that?
Not a good story, not a good ending for quality assurance.
So you came out of school,
Mm-hmm.
went to work for Merck,
Mm-hmm.
and was that drug sales? Was it medical equipment sales? Was it
Drug.
full drugs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what
I sold
is
drugs.
what's that?
I sold drugs.
Sold drugs, okay. Can I put my order in now or later?
They were the good guys.
Walk us through, was there anything within the Merck experience that caused kind of an aha moment, or this doesn't work and why doesn't it work, and well, let's find a solution? Were there any of those moments within your
Yeah.
early career that stood out?
Yeah, there were a couple. I mean, the first thing I realized was that in this particular instance, Merck had been most admired company in the country by Fortune, I think, for 7 consecutive years. So it's kind of a go-to destination in terms of a good name brand. And at the time, they were the largest pharma company in the world. And what I learned when I was there was that somebody who really excelled at their job, the delta in money was very small to someone who was very lazy and didn't do well. That bothered me because I figured that, well, if I was going to bust my butt and really excel, I didn't want to make just a couple $1,000s more than the person at the bottom on the run. So the first aha moment was, this is not a good environment for somebody that wants to work hard and do really well. So after 3 years, I left and then went to Glaxo. And Glaxo was much more, at that time, very entrepreneurial. But I happened to be part, not knowing this, I happened to be part of this massive migration of Merck to Glaxo. So the Mercification of Glaxo is not good. Because Jazzo was it was a London-based pharma company, very maverick, paid their folks a lot more commission, and so folks who did really well could make 3 or 4 times more than what other folks could. And they were very sales and marketing oriented, where Merck was very R&D oriented. The CEO was known to say several times to the Wall Street Journal, our products are so good they can sell themselves. And the sales were sitting there thinking, really? You think so?
So this was Glaxo in Scotland, am I correct?
Well, Glaxo was based in London.
I'm sorry, based in London.
It was in the U.S. And
Okay.
it was at the time they had one of the biggest blockbusters of all time, which was Zantac for ulcers and reflux. So that was their big drug, and they used that as a springboard to get a whole bunch of other drugs onto market. The first new migraine drug, which was called KinometriX, and a miracle drug at the time, which was called Zofran for MS finally throwing out during chemotherapy. So there's some incredible innovations, some asthma drugs, Cerevan, Flovent, Advair. So it was kind of at that point when they had some real, and then they catapulted to the #1 pharma company in the world.
Okay. So you went with Glaxo. How long were you with them?
I was there 4 years.
4 years?
So I was in a managed care division and then went to national accounts in the DC area. So I had all the Pentagon, NIH, Walter Reed, Bethesda, Andrews Air Force Base. So did a lot of military and government contracting for the company.
Okay. What caused you to move on? Sounded like you had a pretty nice job.
I was dying. I needed entrepreneurship. I needed a small company play. A big company just wasn't, I couldn't fathom having incremental promotions and just spending 2 years of my life just to do additional analytical work and then wait another 2 years before I could get promoted to a manager. So I had this one guy who was local, well actually he was out of the Philly area, he was with Genentech, he was a manager. Tried to hire me a couple times and we just couldn't kind of make it work. He ended up leaving for a startup in the health IT space based in upstate New York. And he said, hey look, there's this new thing called disease management. It's really up and coming, and I had heard of it because I was in the managed care division and knew what that meant. And he said, you'll be our first. You can head up sales, and if you close deals, you make the company. If you don't close deals, the company goes under. So it's all on your shoulders. And I thought, okay, this is going to be fun. And then we, in 2 years, we took the company public. Now this is kind of after Netscape, if you guys remember the old Netscape days, but pre-internet bubble. So we ended up returning an 80-fold return, 80-fold return to our seed investors. So it was a huge success from that perspective. And I thought, well, that was easy. We could do that again. I want to do 100-fold next time. Didn't quite work out that way, but.
Did you get hit by the bubble?
Yeah, so, so I ended up leaving there and joined a local startup by a local entrepreneur, Bill Nyland, who founded Harpoon Medical, and he recently had an exit. He actually hired me on board to head up sales and marketing and mergers and acquisitions for a healthcare services roll-up called National Sleep Technologies based out of Annapolis. And I had found it. My wife was pregnant at the time with our first kid, my oldest son. And I was just kind of in the early days just tooling on the internet looking at these static websites and found this static site that said, yeah, they're looking at doing a sleep medicine roll-up. And they were looking for help and they wanted to raise money. And I thought, oh, this sounds kind of fascinating. I never heard of anybody making money off of sleep. So I sent a resume, forgot about it, and then he called me up about a week later and said, yeah, love your resume, disease management background, will you come in and interview? And so I joined an Annapolis-based company, and it was National Sleep Technologies. We bought 80 sleep labs, rolled it up from 0 to 20 million in revenue, and then sold it to a division of GE Medical. Well, it was a vital signs division. And that was a smaller exit. It wasn't 80-fold, it was a 3-fold return to investors, but it was nevertheless a decent exit.
And so, so that company was purely a roll-up management company, or was there product development, evolution, that type of thing within that portfolio?
It was a service company.
Okay.
So we did outsource. The business model would be, we would go into hospitals and we would set up a turnkey sleep diagnostic service for the hospital. We would charge a certain amount of money, and then they would just simply mark it up and charge a larger amount of money to the payers. And then we started getting into the therapy business, so we do diagnostics and therapy, and then we would buy these other companies around the country that would do similar things, and we were the first national player. And the company still exists, it's Sleep Services of America, right at BWI Airport, so it's still there. And a friend of mine still runs it, and John Mathias.
Okay, so you go from returning an 80x to one group of investors to returning a measly 3x.
Yes.
How did you manage those expectations?
Well, I mean, it was healthcare services, so, and that was during the dot-com heyday, so everybody was seeing fantastic valuations on tech, and we were traditional health services. So we were out of vogue. So the investing environment back then was a little different. Healthcare services wasn't so highly praised back then, and everybody was thinking about internet companies and kind of crazy, pets.com, that kind of thing. So it was okay. It wasn't fantastic, but it was reasonable for a health services role to play that didn't really have any kind of technologies play. Traditional cash flow play.
Okay. And then from there, you went on to a series of other startups, emerging and hyper-growth companies,
Yes.
I think would be the appropriate word.
Yeah.
And over that period of time, you raised a total of, what, 125 million plus or minus, with 25 of it being from Australia?
Yeah. So the next one was a CEO. It was my very first turnaround. It was a company called Sleep Solutions based in Palo Alto. I was the fifth or sixth CEO that came on board at that time. And boy, was that baptism by fire. It was a turnaround, didn't realize it was a turnaround, had to deliver some very bad news after about 6 months to the investors that what they thought was what was happening in the company wasn't happening. And that was right after 9/11. So we went on this 8-year slog of trying to get in-home sleep apnea. So it was a medical device company that had a service revenue model that was pretty innovative at the time. So you didn't have to go to a sleep lab to get a sleep study. You can now have this device shipped to your home, self-administer your test, send it all back, and it's 1/10 the price. But Medicare didn't pay for it, insurance companies paid for it, and no one had ever seen anything like it, so no one wanted to invest in it. So I was CEO there for 8 years. We took it to Medicare. At the 11th hour, we lost, so we had a bit of a nuclear winter, and then we tried it again and we won. And the company basically took the company from 2 million to 20 million. And then at that point, and I raised about 50 million there, but most of that came during the last 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of bootstrapping, and if you talk to my wife, she'll say it was more than bootstrapping, more like starving. But there was actually a period there where I didn't go on a vacation for 5 consecutive years. That's pretty rough.
I know that feeling.
And I put in 200,000 miles flying every year, just in the U.S.
Oh.
No international, just U.S.
You just mentioned a word that we hear a lot, but many people may not really understand it, bootstrapping.
Yeah.
Give us your definition of bootstrapping. Give us some examples of what you mean in your personal experiences that you've had to go through to make ends meet. I like to say that there have been times in my career when I literally have had to decide whether I'm going to feed my dog or I'm going to eat the dog's food.
Right, yeah, no, so when I came on board, we had about 5 million in the bank. We were burning about $1 million a month. I had my controller who was in Palo Alto. I asked him what we were paying for rent when I first got the job, and he said, we're paying, I think it was $12 a square foot. And I thought, Palo Alto, God, this is great. You got a great deal. I mean, it wasn't anything special. I kept looking at the P&L, and I'm thinking, there's someone's moving a decimal point because that's not $12 an hour. So I went back to him and said, I'm having a hard time understanding where the $12 a square foot, where that's coming from. He said, yeah, $12 a square foot per month. He said, per month. Wait a minute, we'd say per year on the East Coast. He said, no, that's 144 per year. I had no idea. It was nothing special. So we were burning a ton of money. And when the board decided, they basically kind of gave me an ultimatum from my very first CEO gig. They said, well, you shut the company, shut it down. And I had this kind of come to Jesus meeting where I had to think, well, can I really make this thing work? Can I make it work? And basically I had to pretty much fire everybody. And we had about 40 employees at the time. And then bootstrap it, where literally at the point that we raised our first $20 million tranche, I had $20,000 left in the bank for a company that had a monthly burn of about $20,000-$30,000. So over the period of years, I had to stretch out. We ended up, at the time it all settled and paying severances and everything, I had about a little under $1 million left, and that had to last me years to make the company go. So that was bootstrap.
You mentioned something about the fact that you had to fire a lot of people, or lay them off, let them go.
Right.
And
Good people.
that, in my experience, has been one of the unrecognized real tragedies of being a startup, and that is facing that possibility or the probability that you're going to have to go through that. How did you prepare yourself to have to deal with that kind of a I'm assuming it was a gut-wrenching, very emotional situation for you.
Oh yeah, well it happened all within 24, 48 hours. I mean, it wasn't, so I had inherited this fantastic Silicon Valley company. They burned through $28 million prior to me getting there. And so the thought was, yes, they just don't have it right. Now we've got a guy that's from the industry, we're gonna figure it out. And then once I did the assessment, I had to deliver the blunt truth to the board, saying, look, we're years away from being anywhere near what we thought you had. And they basically said, shut it down. So I had to figure out, could we salvage it? And the only way to salvage it was to gut the company. We had literally at one point only 4 employees. And then when I stepped down 8 years later, we had 110 employees and 20 some odd million in revenue. So it was a cycle. Yeah, boy, it was hard. How do I prepare for it? It happened so fast. It was just, It was survival at that point. It was whether or not we could actually make the thing work. And we had no idea if we could or not. Because you're losing everybody and you had to really rethink.
Okay, so when you had to break the news to the majority of the employees, or did you have to break it to them in mass, or did you do it one-on-one? How did you prepare for that?
We did it in mass.
Okay.
And then, of course, folks were upset. But in Silicon Valley, it was after the dot-com crash, and things were starting to recover. So most folks were able to get jobs pretty quickly, and we were providing fantastic references for everyone. So it was hard. And we didn't have a lot of severance to be able to offer, but we gave them some severance to be able to at least transition out. But it was hard. But they understood. In Silicon Valley, those kinds of things would happen, and they were used to it. And then after the bootstrapping kind of process ended, we ended up relocating the company in Maryland, literally a block down from the sleep services company. So that was kind of fun. So we relocated it to Maryland, and then cut our costs dramatically, and ended up getting Medicare to approve a reimbursement, closed $50 million in funding of 2 tranches. And now the company's still around as Novosom, so it still exists.
Okay. So from there, you stepped down. What was your next big move? What did you decide to then do?
So I was burned out. It was time we were at a $20 million run rate, and it was time for new folks to kind of come in. And I just decided to open up a consulting. My wife and I, we sat down outside over a drink, and we just said, what do we want to do? And then we just decided, why don't we try the consulting thing first and see what happens. And after some really good consulting projects over the course of the next year or so, I started getting pinged again for turnarounds. And that's where the Australian opportunity came along. So I was living a fat and happy life as a consultant, where I do all these expensive reports and no one would ever listen to them and they would implement them. That was always satisfying. And then, so this recruiter contacted me on LinkedIn and said, hey, we got this interesting startup. It's publicly traded in Australia, offices in Haifa, Israel, Southern California, and Australia, and they only have 3 months cash left. And I started laughing. I said, so what do you want me to do? And they said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, okay. So I took a look at it. They had unbelievable patent portfolio. They had 36 patents issued. They had burned through $60 million. They had 40 engineers in Haifa. They had spent, and it was about a $2 million a month burn. And some US investors had gotten involved and just figured that it's just on the wrong track. And it was an asthma medical device company using neural networks to analyze wheeze and breath recordings. And they were trying to figure out if they could diagnose asthma better than the gold standard, which they thought was spirometry, which in reality is a doc and a stethoscope in their ear. So there was a strategic error there. And they just struggled and they couldn't make it work. And so we came in, I say we because I brought in a whole new management team. We ended up having a clean house there also. Because with a massive burn and being publicly traded, there were some really tricky rules in Australia for public companies that you had to, it's not like being private and venture capital back where you could just be really blunt with your board and say, here's the deal, this is what we got to do. You have to have a lot of public relations. And be, a little more subtle in terms of messaging. So we went into a bootstrapping mode there. And we had, as a family, we had scheduled with some very close family friends a trip to Spain. And talking to my wife, we said, well, this is kind of interesting. In 3 months, I'm going to learn whether or not this company's going to die or it's going to live. But we're going to miss our vacation. And she said, gosh, it sounds exotic. Let's give it a shot, see what happens. And so we went ahead and canned that vacation and saw what it was like. And the short story is we turned it into one of the very first digital health companies. It was back in 2011. And raised $25 million over the 2.5 years or so I was there, and took the market cap of the company from $4 million to $250 million during that time frame. And we, before we ever launched our first product. It was a good outcome.
So at what point in time did the opportunity with INOVA begin to evolve? Was that
It was years later.
Okay.
So I then, after I stepped down there, because I made 13 trips in 2.5 years to Australia, so that was not commuting. So that was a tough commute. So then at that point, I was managing a portfolio of startup companies where I bring a virtual team of different C-suite executives, so I would be CEO of multiple companies, because I couldn't afford full-time folks. And there were a couple of turnarounds that were involved there too, and some de novo startups. And so I had done that for a couple of years, and then was just actually contacted by Pete Jobsey and then Hoax Johnson, who had passed away last September, unexpectedly, and said, hey, look, we're doing some things here at INOVA, I want you to take a look at it. And they said, yeah, so I got on the phone, I had no idea who these people were. And they said, well, we want to start an accelerator. I said, well, I'm not interested. I don't like accelerators. I don't believe in them. I just have a hard time. I think they're great for millennials. They're great parties in Silicon Valley. I'm an old guy. I build companies. My idea of partying is watching a good movie, maybe some scotch, but I'm too old for that. They said, no, we're really more interested in building kind of an old-fashioned strategic investor fund that's seed-based. We've been doing some late-stage investing, but the early-stage stuff just isn't around. So I thought, okay, this sounds kind of interesting because I know all the money I've ever raised has been from outside the region. So I bring companies into Maryland, start up some of them, but my money came from Silicon Valley, Boston, Philly, Dallas, Chicago, anywhere but here. Never came from here. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous, especially for healthcare. So I thought, okay, well, let me take a look. And the guys are great. Some of the smartest guys I've ever worked with. We added a new partner when I was there, Rick Gordon, who was famous for building a world-class cyber security accelerator called Mach 37. Just an exceptional Naval Academy grad, wrestler, and submariner, and So he's just exceptionally bright. So the crackerjack team, and so that was really, for me, when I tell my friends, they say, why are you going to the dark side? You know, from being an entrepreneur to an investor, and I thought, well, you know, it's a chance to change the ecosystem here, because this should be the epicenter for healthcare. It really should. NIH, Medicare, you know, FDA. And everyone goes out. They get money elsewhere, they leave here, they go other places. And there's incredible talent from all the great universities that we have, all the great entrepreneurs. And what happens is that everyone in the tech field starts to make money. And once you make a little bit of money from building a company and selling it, they all come to healthcare. As you can see, all the super billionaires, they all go to healthcare. They want to make their impact, make their mark on mankind. And technology does it, but healthcare is where you make a lasting impression. There's a lot of problems with healthcare, a lot of opportunity. It's about 20 years behind technology. And so a lot of folks want to make change. And so that's a long-winded answer to your question.
Okay. The Accelerator is part of the larger INOVA healthcare system. Tell us a little bit more about INOVA and what is their unique differentiator or series of differentiators in what appears to be a fairly crowded healthcare space in this region.
Yeah, so that was the other interesting thing. So INOVA was late to the game. They were the 50th health system to set up a venture fund that was $100 million or more, and very late to the game. And so they set up $150 million, and they invest in other venture capital funds, late stage companies, and early stage companies. The early stage part's called an accelerator. It's not really an accelerator. We do seed investments. We have very hands-on help with the startups, but we don't, the whole idea is not to have a bunch of classes and teach Entrepreneurship 101. It's really to look for good investments as a strategic investor. So the accelerator is really just the term for early stage investing. And one of my partners, Rick Gordon, we just had an event last week where he did some research and basically showed that early stage health tech investing is just fallen off a cliff nationally. There's a lot of investing in all of venture capital. There's a lot of investing in late stage healthcare, but the early stage has just, it's like catching a falling knife. It's just fallen dramatically. And so the thinking is that we have a chance now to really not only alter kind of the regionals area in the ecosystem, but we have a chance maybe to reshape kind of national thought in terms of early stage investing, because no one's doing it. Very few people are doing it.
Did you or have you and Rick gotten any kind of a sense for why that early stage investment in healthcare has gone through the floor?
We don't know why. We have theories. I saw this happen back in the dot-com days. So when the economy booms and unemployment drops to historical lows, money rushes into tech, because tech is easy, right? There's no FDA, there's no Medicare, there's no patients, there's no HIPAA, the regulations are just not there. So you can make all these disappearing apps for teenagers, and you can be a billionaire in 18 months. But save a life, there's no money to save lives. So I think there's a bit of a cycle there. That's a bit of a challenge. A lot of investors are concerned about the FDA, and they're concerned about reimbursement, and they're concerned about the time it takes to get to your first product to commercialize. In a software company, you can give somebody $25,000 or $50,000 and have them put together a product and start to commercialize it. In healthcare, that covers your patent costs. That's about all you get. You need a lot of money. You need millions to do clinical trial work. And then the FDA, and the FDA is getting much better, by the way. I mean, Dr. Gottlieb is just amazing. I mean, he's probably one of the best FDA commissioners I've ever seen, and it's still a challenge. So, I mean, things are getting much, much better, but they're still hard. And when you think about investing your own money or investing somebody else's money, you kind of go where you think you're going to make a bigger bang and quicker. Those are theories. We don't really know.
Well, you mentioned that it takes a lot of money. Okay, and I think that's pretty much a given. But the other thing about health tech or biotech, that universe, is that while you can go and scale a company in 2 or 3 or 4 years in tech or some other area and be a very viable organization, it could take you 10, 12, 15 years to get through everything that you just mentioned, the FDA approvals, not only the approvals, but the trials and multiple steps there.
Yeah.
So to be an investor, you're operating under a completely different investing paradigm than somebody in a normal tech business.
It definitely is. Now, on the biotech and pharma, it's definitely 10 to 12 years, $1 billion in, $1 billion to get you there. So that's a much different ballgame. When you're in medical devices or medical technology, much less. You're looking at maybe $10 to $30 million all in, and somewhere between 3 to 5 years to get a product. But what's different about health tech is that you can hit a liquidity event before you ever commercialize. Commercialization is not the key value creating milestone. It really is getting through the FDA, getting reimbursement, making sure you have robust clinical trials to prove that your thing works, it's really efficacious, or good at diagnosing, it's very accurate. And then there's a new paradigm that we thought we were at the vanguard during the Australian public company, is what we call the RX to OTC switch. So basically taking RX powered stuff and bringing it direct to consumers and doing it at a much lower cost and skipping the reimbursement challenge all the way. Now, health savings accounts now account for about 25% of all insurance plans in the United States. So consumers, the ACA kind of ushered in the skyrocketing premiums, and folks are paying more. And so they're going to become more savvy investors, consumers and shoppers of healthcare. If you ever remember that kind of back in the 80s, before the personal computer was really big, the technology, the jargon for the technology was challenging, especially for a non-tech person like me, understanding CPU and processor speed and gigabytes and hard drives, and actually it's megabytes back then, floppy drives, and iMegaset drives, and I'm dating myself. But everybody figured out a way to understand the jargon, and now people understand what makes an iPhone really robust and good, and a computer and a laptop. Same for healthcare. Folks are going to figure that out. They're getting more savvy. It takes a little bit of time. So we really do think that there's a way to empower consumers with deciding more about their healthcare, and you deliver it at a lower cost. And the trick, though, is going to be the FDA. The FDA. So when an FDA approves something that's prescription-based, the doc is on the hook for the liability. When the FDA approves direct-to-consumer, the FDA is on the hook. So it's a challenge, but it does represent a much more robust offering, I think, in many markets.
Okay, so the INOVA Accelerator, what are you looking for now? I'm sure that you've got a pipeline of some level. And I believe that the Accelerator will only take 6 companies into the program at any point in time, and then work with them intensively. Tell us what you're looking for, and tell us the criteria that you're looking at for companies, and what can companies expect working with you and with INOVA?
Yeah, so when we first designed what we thought the criteria would be, and we said 6 at any one time, we thought that 6 might be the maximum number of investments that might be needed. But a lot of it depends on the stage of the company, the management team that's in place. So we now think that we can actually go between 9 and 10 total investments. So we'll take a company that has a prototype and a proof of concept or a validation study. So we won't fund a business plan. We need to know that the thing that is there actually works. We'll look at healthcare IT, we'll look at analytics, we'll look at AI and machine learning, we'll look at wearables, diagnostics, genomics, medical devices, digital therapies, and there's all kinds of things that we'll look at that has any kind of flavor of a personalized health, a personalized medicine approach to it. And we'll go really early on, and we'll go with just the founder. And we can invest as little as $75,000. We've made initial investments as large as $500,000. We reserve about $1.2 to $1.5 million in additional capital for every investment we make for follow-on investments. Our expectation is that we will be able to catalyze them to a Series A funding, where we bring in other venture capitalists or other investors. And we have other health systems. I'm on a monthly call with 2 dozen health systems that have over $100 million or more allocated for investment. Most of them are doing late stage stuff. We're kind of one of the few that does the early stage. but a lot of them are interested. So we'll look for any kind of opportunity that can deliver a venture capital return to INOVA, but we also look for strategic assets that we have that are collecting dust or haven't been monetized yet. A good example is, I was on the phone today with the CEO from a company in Dublin, Ireland. He has a digital pathology company, and INOVA has millions and millions of slides, pathology slides that have never been digitized. And our thought was, okay, we could probably help this company with millions of slides with machine learning algorithms to start to help, and they're targeting GI cancers and GI issues on the pathology side. We could probably catapult them to a global leadership position in a period of a year or so. And we could be a kingmaker, and then we can bring in other health systems that do the same. So as a customer, and as the assets that we have, in addition to the money that we invest, we could truly add a lot more value. So we look for opportunities like that. And you'll talk to Sam today. KinometriX is another example. We saw a tremendous amount and the team was very solid, and we had the ability to be able to help kind of jumpstart their development to a global leadership position within maybe 12 months. So that was worth the risk for us.
I think you and I probably have some similar thoughts about this area, about our ecosystem and all the natural resources that we have here. The fact that we have the things like the GovTech, we have the cyber tech, we have the IT, but we also have the ed tech, the med tech, the biotech world. What do you see being, what do we need to do as a region, as Mid-Maryland, as, three counties? What do we need to be doing now to be able to begin attracting the talent and the companies from outside this area to locate here and to build the financial base that we can support?
So my personal opinion is you need money. The talent is here, the entrepreneurship is here. There's no lack of talent, entrepreneurship. Universities are world class. There's no question that we have all of those resources. Plus, we have all the regulatory bodies that govern the way a lot of the world thinks, whether it's Medicare, FDA, whatever it might be. So we really think it's money. And if you talk to other investors, and we had a panel last week where we had this big analysis, and we had this panel with other early stage investors. One from actually a college buddy of mine, heads of the Cleveland Clinic venture group. Another one from Chicago who does early stage investing. We had Rich Bendis from BioHealth Innovations was there, and then Moss Almer from Maryland Venture Fund was there. And their perception was, yeah, there's a lot of money out here. And we're thinking, no, there's not a lot of money. There's not enough money, because we're seeing some great opportunities not get funded, and then we see some silly things in Silicon Valley getting funded, and thinking, what were they smoking when they invested in that company? So, we think number one is money. Number two, we think it needs to be somebody that has kind of a strategic play where we have assets that can really, whether it's a customer, do something to help de-risk the deal so investors feel comfortable in it. And then, the more activity we have, we think that's going to attract some attention to the region. So that's what we think is going to happen. Hopkins is getting into this, University of Maryland, David Weiss from the Momentum Fund, he's really doing a great job. And then Jim Hughes at the University of Maryland Venture Fund. So there are a lot of folks that are really looking at this and trying to figure out how to get into it. But that's and the Maryland Venture Fund itself is doing a great job. So Andy Jones under his leadership is fantastic. So we think the ingredients are there, and we just need to continue to bring more attention to the area in terms of financial help.
If you would, share with us your 3 or your 4 biggest lessons learned over your career as an entrepreneur, a turnaround artist, startup, a CEO, an investor. What can we as the audience take away from the lessons that you have learned in your career?
Wow. Okay, so there are a couple of them. One is that there is such a thing as you can be so innovative so ahead of your time, that's a bad time to be innovative. You don't want to be too far ahead of the curve. So sometimes innovation can be bad, or you can be too far ahead and you need to understand the timing part. So timing is a big issue, big challenge. So you don't want to be too far ahead, at least in med tech or healthcare. So that's probably lesson number one. Lesson number two is always realize that no today from an investor does not mean no tomorrow. And things change. Macro trends change, micro trends change, perceptions change, your value creation milestones are achieved. So no today doesn't mean no tomorrow. The other thing is that I had when I just became CEO of Sleep Solutions, I had one very, very prominent Silicon Valley investor who was also a physician said, you got to bail now. You're going to ruin your reputation staying with this dog. You're the fifth or sixth guy. You're very burned through it. Don't take yourself with it. And I kept thinking, wow, this guy's got some good points, but I can't jump ship. This is my first gig. I got to make sure that this thing is successful. So sometimes bad advice, what you think is good advice could be bad advice. And so you have to sometimes go with your gut, and just read stories all the time about people saying, yeah, that's never going to work and it's never going to make a difference. So sometimes you just have to believe in what you think you can make change and then just go with it, even when it seems like everybody else is against you. And then the last thing is, I'm a big believer in family. I think you got to have a very supportive family, supportive spouse. You can't work 80 hours, 100 hours a week and travel like you do and still wake up every day and think, yeah, it's all worth it. Unless you have that. So make sure you have a good support system.
Great. Have time for a few questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Floor is open, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions for Mike? Yes, sir.
Troy Turner, currently work for the DoD doing funding medical research. One of the problems that we've seen a lot as we fund medical device development from the non-dilutive side is the FDA is a known entity, just a known hurdle. The thing that can actually kill projects, what we've seen even more than FDA, is CMS, and the inability for organizations to receive whatever code they may need, and if they get the code for the wrong demographic, and if they get the demographic for the wrong reimbursement level.
Yeah.
So they may get all of that, but then still end up in a situation where the cost of doing business is X,
Right.
and the reimbursement is X minus whatever.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, so they're like, okay, well, we can't afford to do business.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that? Any experience with that? Any thoughts about things turning around?
Yeah. Okay, so I think there's some good news, and then so the lessons learned. So we fought that battle at Sleep Solutions, and we fought it in some other companies also in terms of the Medicare. And you're right, the process is so challenging. Getting a new code, we're trying to fit into an existing code, then you have medical policy, and it's very complex, extremely expensive, and it takes years of your life just trying to figure that out. The good news is that I think depending on what you're doing, whether it's a therapy or a diagnostic or monitoring or whatever it might be, there are all innovations in business models that we think are extremely important that can be very handy, and where Medicare could potentially become an asset, even though they may not be the reimbursement component to it. So the macro trend is that their deductibles are skyrocketing, premiums are skyrocketing. That trend's not going to abate anytime soon. So we think consumers are going to drive more of their healthcare decisions. We think self-insured employers, which represent 60% of all insurance in the United States, are becoming more in tune with what is delivering bottom line results, as well as employee productivity. So anything that could potentially be delivered as an OTC solution, that's an FDA challenge and not necessarily a Medicare challenge, if that's possible. So we like that area, and we think that that's very promising. When it comes to reimbursement, the other part too is that, and I had to battle investors with this too. So investors, especially in the med tech space, they like to get to a minimally viable product and get the thing out to market as fast as they possibly can. That's the wrong thing to do in med tech. Software is great, bad in med tech. What you really need to do whenever you're thinking about commercialization is you really have to have a seriously robust validation study or studies that are published And then you really need to think about outcomes. Because the Blue Cross Blue Shield tech assessment has been very clear, Medicare has been very clear about their tech assessment criteria. They've given everybody a roadmap. So investors need to seriously look at, can we really impact patient outcomes, or are we just going to add extra cost to the system? And I think those kind of studies need to be taken on much earlier, as well as just thinking about the efficacy or diagnostic precision or whatever it might be. You need to think about patient outcomes. So I would say that if you really have something that is truly worthwhile, think about outcome study from day one and how you're going to do it and how you're going to improve it. Because the criteria have been out there for a while. Think about how you're going to fit that way. And then payers are going to be challenged at that point. They're going to have to they're going to be forced to figure out, okay, if you're improving outcomes, either lowering cost or saving lives or preventing readmissions, you have a much more powerful, I think that's another way of looking at it. But it's hard because it means more money. It means more money and more time before you can actually get to market. The other challenge on the non-dilutive funding part that we have seen is that many folks who get non-dilutive grant funding are exceptionally adept at writing grants. They're not so exceptionally adept at commercializing a product or figuring out how to actually have a business model to get the thing to the market. So we've seen many companies will come to us bragging about, well, we have $60 million or $15 million in non-dilutive funding. And we're thinking, well, why are you only here? Why aren't you there? Why haven't you gone farther? And because of academics and they just know how to write the right grants. So that's another challenge too, is that we do see a lot of money going into things that haven't been progressed to a commercialization stage. And then I'd say the last and final thing on the non-dilutive funding part, the definition of innovative is hyper-scientific and hyper-technical in many cases, and not so much commercial. What I mean by that is, if something's been published in peer-reviewed literature, I know there's a long way to answer your question, but if something's been published in peer-reviewed literature, a reviewer is going to say, yeah, that's not innovative. We've seen that before. But it could be something that has been published 4 or 5 times, but yet hasn't seen the light of day for a reason. And someone could bring an innovative way of commercializing that and impacting patient outcomes or lowering costs pretty quickly. So those would be other ways I would hope that DoD, other folks might take a look at it and say, if you want to get this to the market, make sure that there's a mechanism there to get it there. I know you guys, in a lot of SBIR grants, a lot of folks really do look at the commercialization part, but some of it is just a section on a grant as opposed to maybe being substantively.
That's a good observation. So there's been an increase over the last few years. There's been an increase in the okay, but then what are you going to do? So how are you going to get it to market? How are you going to transition it, or in what way is this going to translate? It hasn't always been there. It's a lot of times it's academics on the inside, managing academics on the outside, and it's like, that's a great paper. Good job.
Right. That's exactly right.
So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, Frank.
I'm Frank at Jazzo. I've been supporting some startups focused on healthcare for older adults in Baltimore, so I'm more familiar with what goes on in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And I've seen exactly what you just talked about. A lot of the startups that I've been exposed to, they really have strength, either clinical strength, technical strength, financial strength, and Baltimore does have some world-class resources, but getting the parties to kind of play together, and getting academics to worry about the commercial, and getting technical people to worry about evidence that it's going to produce a better outcome, has been really, really difficult, including places like Hopkins that sits on a treasure trove of discoveries and intellectual property, and they can't figure out how to move beyond seeking grants to figure out how to commercialize what they've got. So it's really been difficult to get people to, and I'm wondering how you've been able to get the different parties, because you've got to nail it across all those dimensions. And in many cases, they haven't figured out how to commercialize what they've been working on. And they can't get out of their own kind of professional expertise. And it goes nowhere.
So that's the other issue that we see a lot of times too from some of the world-class places like Hopkins, Stanford, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo. Lots of science projects get funded. And they're not necessarily, they're interesting because a doc or a world-class researcher says, this is a problem, I want to fix it. but it's not a problem the rest of the world wants to buy. It's not the community hospital, family practice doc in suburbia, or Aetna or Blues are willing to pay for. So the solution kind of misses from that perspective. One of the best areas I've ever seen is Boston Children's. They have the most amazing internal program. They're incredibly brutal in their honesty to some of the top docs in pediatric care about whether or not their innovations are really truly innovative. So they have a really good program. Hopkins is number one in the world, I think, in terms of grant funding and research. Obviously, top hospital, I think, in the world for, 100 years, something like that. We just had a call with a new venture group that's forming right outside of Hopkins called 1812 Ventures. They're investing in late-stage companies. We're thinking, really? You're outside of Hopkins, you're investing in late-stage companies? So people are skipping all the hard part in terms of the early-stage stuff. And part of it is that somebody's not there to say, that's a science project, that could be a real business. And so we're seeing a disconnect there. So what we're doing is we're saying that we come from essentially a group of community hospitals that were merged together to become a big health system. Now, we're not a big health system compared to a lot of the New York health systems or some of the other ones in terms of size. We're about $3.5 billion in revenue, we're about a $5 billion endowment, but it's in a very affluent area, a very highly educated area, and INOVA was just named one of the top 8 hospitals in terms of, for a nonprofit, profitability. So they know they're doing really well in an area where most hospitals are not doing well. And so we're leveraging that to try to say, okay, what are the science projects, what are the true commercial opportunities, and where can we figure out a way to improve patient outcomes at lower costs? I mean, it does have a personalized focus, but the other thing is that the days of bringing in, unless you're an orphan drug and dealing with some cancer therapeutics, I think the days of overcharging for products, it's done. So we're thinking, hey, lower the cost. Give me something that's inexpensive that you can do that's really meaningful. A lot of it's software-driven, machine learning, data-driven, but a lot of it's business model innovation too.
Art, one more, because we have to move on.
Thanks. If you're looking at applications for people applying to the Accelerator and you have competing applications, what stands out? How does one stand out over the other? Is it the usability within the INOVA system, or it is their potential exit, or what does that?
So we first and foremost look for a great opportunity to build a company. So we look at the management team and the technology and the opportunity, the market that they're addressing. Are they really solving a problem that really needs to be solved? And do they have what we think is a good answer for that? And the team that can do it. So that's the first thing that we do. And the second thing that we do is we go back into INOVA and we try to find out, what does INOVA think? What are physicians, specialists, or department? Do we have the assets that can actually catapult this thing to a better position? Because if we're nothing more than, we're not simply venture capital investors, we're strategic. So there has to be some kind of benefit to INOVA, or INOVA has to be able to have an outsized benefit to the company. So it kind of works both ways. So we look for that. We've had 350 companies since October send us business applications. We've invested in 3. We're doing deep due diligence on 3 more. And we have our backlog. We have a pipeline of about 50 companies that we haven't reviewed yet. So we seem to be getting some good opportunities. And they do come from all over the world. We prefer local, but we'll take an opportunity anywhere because we figure if we can bring innovation here, get it seeded here, it'll still jumpstart the ecosystem.
Mike, thank you. And don't leave.
Okay.
Now the second portion of our event, and I'm sorry things ran a little bit over, is we're thrilled to have, I don't know why I'm using this. We're thrilled to have one of INOVA's portfolio companies here with us tonight, and their co-founder and CEO, Mike Jazzo of the company KinometriX, and we're featuring him as our local startup. So come on up, Sam. And the way this is going to work is I want Sam to give a 5 to 8 minute kind of summary of where they've been, where they are, where they want to go, and then I've asked Sam to put forth to us as a community a problem, an issue, a challenge, or an opportunity with which they're struggling real time right now, and then give us as a community an opportunity to do some crowdsourced opportunity analysis and brainstorming to help Sam and KinometriX take the next step. So, Sam,
The floor is mine.
tell us, yeah.
Yeah, so my name's Sam Jazzo. I'm a co-founder and CEO of KinometriX. We use a small motion sensor and a cloud-based platform to objectively assess how people are recovering as they go through physical therapy or other rehabilitation. So how many people here have been to a PT in the past? Anybody? Okay, so all of you have been to a PT. So you know that when you walk in, you say, your PT will say to you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling today? And you'll give them a number. You'll say, all right, today's a 6 day. Last week was a 4 day. Next week it's a 2 day. There's no real consistency in tracking that outcome. And more importantly, it's a subjective outcome that we can't really follow and base a standard off of. So that's where KinometriX came in. Myself, I'm a certified athletic trainer. If you've ever watched a football game and you see the guy on the ground holding his leg and you see somebody running over to treat them, that's what I did. I worked at the University of Miami with plenty of current and past professional athletes. So I watch football games on Sunday and I say, oh, that guy's a total jerk. When I was doing my clinical rotations and when I was working in the clinic, I kind of realized that there was not a good way to objectively track how we were recovering and how our patients were progressing. And so I finished up school, I moved back here to the DC area, and I found a doctor and an engineer who were doing some cool stuff with sensors, trying to get potentially into the occupational health space or maybe into the sports performance space. And I sat down with them and I said, I've seen this, that we lack a really good tool to give to clinicians to objectively track their patients. Everything that exists right now is either bulky, expensive, takes up a lot of space in very limited clinics. And my two co-founders looked at me and they go, yeah, we could probably do that with sensors. And I said, well, that's fantastic. When did we start? So I was doing consulting for the military through a small consulting shop, and I got to do some really cool stuff there. I got to brief the Office of the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon. But my co-founder said, we're really starting to kick this up. We found out that we could get insurance reimbursement. Are you willing to jump ship? And I said, boy, no salary? When do you think we'll make a salary? Oh, don't worry, 3, maybe 6 months from now, you'll be back on salary. Over a year later, still no salary. So it's been a fun adventure. I've learned an unbelievable amount of things that I would have never realized had I not sort of made this jump. I can talk now intelligently about insurance policy. I can talk about Medicare policy, but I can also talk about how to run a development team, how to run software development, the type of language you need to run, all that stuff that I would have never imagined when I was going through my clinical education. So we've had plenty of success on our way, but we've also had tons of failures. Failures is a word that Chris doesn't want me to use. He says roadblocks. Roadblocks, yeah, roadblocks. I've had tons of roadblocks and many teachable moments on the way. Like learning that offshore development is not the way you go. And even if they say they're onshore, they may be offshore. I remember our first conversation with our first development team, and they said, oh yeah, we're onshore. Argentina. And I said, what part of the United States is Argentina in? And they said, oh, don't worry about it. We have an office in San Antonio. And I said, I don't think that's how that really works. So, whether it's learning how to sort of separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of how to find the proper development team, learning things about insurance reimbursement, what medical policy is. If anybody here is in a health tech entrepreneur or in the health tech entrepreneurship space, medical policy is your worst nightmare. Because at any point, at any given time, an insurer could say, yeah, we were paying doctors or therapists or healthcare providers to use your product, but actually we're done. Not anymore. We're okay. And that's what keeps me up at night is medical policy, but we're working around that. In terms of successes, we raised a small friends and family round, which was lucky. You really have to draw upon your resources that you have and to find people who believe what you believe, that you can really make an impact in a very large space, especially one as large as healthcare. We all know how messed up it is. The incentives are very poor, but if you find the people who say, you know what, I think you can do it, then you got to stick to those people and make sure that they put their money where their mouth is. And then eventually with that money, we were able to pique the interest of a big hospital system and sort of get in front of them and show them what we were doing and show them that we had the right team for the right solution for the right market. And that happened through a cold call. I sent INOVA an email. I said, hey, I see you're doing entrepreneurship training. Do you mind if we participate in your entrepreneurship training? And right away I got an email back that said, what are you doing? You're doing what for the physical therapy space? Can you come in and meet with us? We want to hear more about this. And since then it's been sort of all downhill. So that's really my story to this point. We just got accepted into the INOVA Personalized Healthcare Accelerator. We started piloting at one of the INOVA outpatient rehabilitation facilities, and we're looking to add more. INOVA has been really great. They have provided us an outpatient facility that sees over 25,000 patients a year, and we're going to add another clinic that sees over 12,000 a year. So that's the kind of stuff that we need to build our machine learning algorithms to build a normative data set and create a product that is truly world-class and market-leading.
Cool. Okay, so your problem, your issue, your challenge.
My challenge. So my biggest problem right now is I have a group of really great, really smart therapists who we're working with to adopt our first product, but they only use my product when I'm there with them. And I've had them tell me that there's extreme value in what we do, but they just don't think about using our product when they don't see my face around. So does anybody have any great ways to sort of help push forward adoption in a paradigm-shifting technology?
One question first. When you go to physical therapy, do they use any pictures on the wall to show proper stance, to show proper ways to do things?
Not at this clinic, no.
Because I was going to say, just make a fat head of yourself. Put on the wall with the proper positioning and standing. And so, I mean, again, if you're the trigger, find a way to get that trigger, more recognized. So, if they're using manuals for something, put your face on the manual.
Good idea.
Yeah.
You said that your product is reimbursable if they use it.
Right.
So why are they not using it if they can get additional reimbursement using your product, instead of not using your product?
Mike, plug your ears. So the incentive system inside of the clinic is not super great from a financial standpoint. So the therapists report to a physical therapy manager, who reports to an outpatient rehabilitation manager, who then reports to a hospital manager, who then reports to the health system. So they're like 5 or 6 levels removed from caring about revenue. And I've even had a therapist say to me, we know that we don't matter whether we gain money or lose money for our hospital because, the electrophysiology lab or the cardiac cath lab are the big money makers around here. So, they told us don't even bother trying to write letters of medical necessity to get denied claims overturned.
Have you thought about moving out of a hospital PT setting to a private PT setting maybe? Because they are more apt to worry more about reimbursement and have the correct SOPs, so your system will be used.
And they have posters too.
Well, that's a really great point. From the standpoint of moving to an outpatient setting, and a private outpatient setting, it's more difficult than that because you have to get buy-in from owners and therapists at a place like that. Whereas with an INOVA system, you can really have something that's more lofty, something that you think has theoretical benefits, but not sort of upfront benefits.
So how about, because my other business is medical supplies, I'm managing fleets and stuff, and they're incentivizing, having some kind of a competition saying, hey, every time you use it, I'm gonna put you in kind of a check system, and if you do certain threshold, Starbucks cars, blah, blah, whatever else to incentivize them using it. So this way it's not tied to the reimbursement, it's more tied to their personal gain.
Yep.
The Starbucks card maybe.
That doesn't sound like a bad idea.
What's the legality like if you were to instead get communication out to the patients and have them ask the therapist if they have that product? Because that's how I would flip that problem around. I would say, how do I get the patients to say, hey, by the way, I heard about this thing. Do you guys have that? I want to try it. Now the patient's asking the therapist, you only have to worry about them remembering it.
So in essence, Joe, if I'm hearing you correct, it's almost going around the house to come in the back door to force, by using the patient as the driver, to build the adoption within the therapist. Because those of us,
I mean, we could run a targeted Facebook campaign to the people who like Loudon Hospital's Facebook page.
Yeah, celebrity endorsement, get the Redskins or the Ravens.
What so the INOVA sports medicine folks are the team docs for the Nationals and for the Redskins.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they're for the Caps too, or
I think that's right.
Mets are.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'll help you out with that for free.
yes, Frank.
I don't think it's necessarily a solution, but one of the problems I've seen with some of these startups I work with as well is this perception that they are disregarding or ignoring or just oblivious to the impact on the workflows of the healthcare providers.
Yeah.
And you know what? After the EHR debacle,
Yep.
healthcare providers don't want anybody coming and saying they've got this great tech
Yeah.
unless they have really figured out how to make using the tech easier than the way they do their current job. There's a local company, WellDoc, that had to figure out how to create a process for a prescribable app that both the doctor and the pharmacist were kind of sold on. This is no more difficult than the way I was used to running a prescription for a med and fulfilling. You might take a look at what they've done. You've got to convey to these people that you're not only producing better outcomes, you're trying to make their life easier. Because they see it as an EHR implementation, like screw that.
Yeah, so that's actually been the core of our business. We really try to sell ourselves as the people who empower clinicians. We do have a couple of other competitive technologies in our space, and they really make it much harder for the clinician to get good data. And so we've built our system from day one to make this as easy as possible for therapists, whether that's using only one sensor or using a tablet that has an easy interface. Things like that, just to make the workflow issues go away. Because we know, as clinicians ourselves, as a team, that anything that adds time or struggle to the process of doing anything with a patient is just dead on arrival.
One other point, like when you are selling something, people focus on getting C-level like buy-in. It's not just C-level or even department head. You got to get ground level buy-in. The people who are actually going to do it every day, if you haven't convinced them that this is in their interest, it'll die.
I'd like to add to that. So again, from the military perspective, we have medics in the field that are under fire and they're carrying an 80-pound pack. If we give them something that is going to save lives, any life, if it adds a pound, if it adds an ounce to their pack, they're ditching it. So what we have to do is we have to look at everything that's in the pack and combine, do combinations. So if we want to add a capability, we have to remove a capability, which means we've got to do something to make some combinations in there. So if there's a way of, taken from that, if there's a way of convincing the therapist and the therapist assistant, and not the C-level, right, that this thing will do whatever you're already doing anyway, but also this other thing. And it requires no additional weight, no additional form function, anything like that. That's how we've had success in getting medics to adopt things. Otherwise, they literally throw stuff off the truck.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a good idea.
How much, who would you say your customer is?
Yeah, so our customer is the rehabilitation clinician, whether that's an orthopedic doctor, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a chiropractor, anybody who's responsible for the healthy recovery of somebody with a musculoskeletal injury or a neuromuscular injury.
As you have been evolving the concept, how much customer discovery have you done?
So we've done, admittedly, less customer discovery than we really should have and need to do. We have done a lot of stuff with a small group of clinicians, but we haven't opened it up to a broader group of clinicians.
Have you done any kind of, at least theoretical, customer segmentation by some demographics, by geographics, by et cetera, to see if there are patterns there that may lead you down a path that you otherwise may not have thought? In other words, for every customer that I talk to, and it's an open-ended discussion, what can I do to make your life easier? What Mike says is going to be a little bit different than what Frank says, but by building that critical mass of customer discovery, you're going to begin to see those patterns and those trends develop that will then lead you to focus refining the product to meet those often unstated needs and desires. Bringing up that point about making life easier, okay? Do we really know what that means?
I mean, so every customer I've talked to, they said if you could get rid of my EHR, my life would be great. And unfortunately, we can't completely get rid of the EHR, but we've tried to make our system as easy and as drag and drop as possible. So the second they're done with a test, a report is printed, they can scan it right into their EHR, they can use it and send it to an insurer. They can do a lot of things. They can give it to a patient to take home and put on their refrigerator and say, this is how much progress I've made in physical therapy over the last 4 weeks, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Are you guys, I don't know if INOVA is like this, do you guys use the Epic program or platform? So it's already integrated for that?
No.
Okay, that was going to be my next question. Okay. Because they're going to have to enter that anyway.
It's usually easier to cure cancer than to get integrated.
Yeah, that's why, people that know Epic are making a lot of money now for doing that. I have one more question though, and this is more of a Maryland Central question, and I could be wrong now, it's been a few years since I've been in this kind of arena, but with the focus switching to per capita, how does that affect what you guys are doing from a business plan standpoint? Because in other words, at least I was aware that the global budgeting system was being implemented by the Healthcare Services Cost Review Commission. So Hopkins, Maryland, MedStar are given a global budget to manage under, meaning they want some of the technicians, I guess, to cover more people as opposed to getting paid for fee, per therapy and whatnot. How does that affect what you guys are trying to do?
Yeah, so
Maryland's different than.
It's the only state I think that's like that, and that's why it's so interesting to be here.
Yeah, and INOVA doesn't work that way.
Okay.
But so in an environment in Maryland, that would be a tremendous asset to be able to leverage KinometriX. When you have a very wealthy health system, it's challenging to rise above the noise to get attention. But you're right. You would probably get much more attention in Maryland for sure.
Right, yeah, I mean, with a global budgeting system, if you can track your patients and discharge them when they're healthy and not when, grandma loves getting her back rubs at PT and she's already better, but she has 8 more visits on her therapy script, and discharging her at, when she's back to healthy. That would save the state a whole lot of money and save each one of those.
And I think it would give them recognition too, and that's where I was kind of go with that, is that you could tell some people who aren't using your device right now, look at what we can now show how many people you can handle effectively by doing that stuff.
No, that's great. Did that go into law? Is that law now, or is that just?
You mean the global budgeting? That was taking place, let's see, that was what,
It is.
2014 when I left. Yeah,
And
as I say, it was just implemented when I left doing that kind of stuff, so.
Good to know.
That is good
Yeah.
to know. Maryland it is.
Time for one more. Anybody? Rajiv?
So, we spoke briefly about, what the competition looks like, so
Yeah.
can you just brief and say what exactly differentiates you guys from the rest of the competition? And the other question is, other larger companies, have a lot bigger budgets, and if your product or whatever you're building is not complex enough, then, obviously it can easily copied, they have, sales channels and so on, so how do you, what's your strategy on that?
Yeah, so, well, first, to your first point about competition, what we've found is that our competition in this space is incredibly siloed. So if you look at a pie chart of all the spending that's done in outpatient rehabilitation, what are 6 competitors, what the portion of that pie chart they take up, or the segments that they go after, is only about 23%. For what KinometriX is doing, and with its use cases and functionalities, we can address about 76% of all outpatient spending in that pie chart. So why they've chosen to go into very niche products is still a little bit of a mystery to us. One being that they were enamored with their tech and they thought, you know what, everybody should be doing box jumps, so we do box jumps, and that would be the coolest thing ever. But grandma's not going to be doing box jumps, or your total shoulder replacement's not going to be doing cleans. The other thing that we think is that there's just not been a great business model addressing this giant open piece of pie that sits out there in the rehabilitation space. You have to really bring your costs down, and you have to create a very simple solution to address this market, because the margins are very thin. In terms of your second question, which was how do we protect against a big guy coming in and eating our lunch? The answer to that is data. Right now, data is the most important thing in this field, and nobody has it. And partnering with a big health system like INOVA, that they see potentially hundreds of thousands of patients in rehabilitation every year, you can take a market leader position in data and train algorithms that become extremely defensible that the other guys won't have. So they're forced to do one of 2 things, which is go put boots on the ground and try to get as much data as you've gotten, or 2, buy you.
So I'll ask a very short question. How many months do you hit that normative data that you know is going to work?
So we're hoping to have the normative data by the end of the year.
Mike, Sam, thank you very much. I think they'll be hanging around for just a few more minutes afterwards in case you want to meet and greet, or you have, a thought or an idea to share with them, after the event. Thank you all for coming. I'm hoping that each one of you leaves here a little more educated, a little more inspired, and a little more connected. And I hope to see all of you at our July party. Remember, July 26th, Thursday night.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.